Hello, MouseHunt. Welcome to Feedback Friday. It is May 10, 2019. Hello, everyone in the chat. How's everybody doing today? Oh, I see Brian chatting it up there. As if Jay, hello. KDM, hello. Hey, Dave. Hi, Mark. Ben, Dennis. Hello. KDM with a guess of 48. No, that's incorrect, actually. Today's trivia question will not be a number either, so keep that in mind. Waves, hello, Pokitty. Jay says, Dave, hello, how are you? James, welcome, Sir David, Major Master Sir. I don't think I guess I've been knighted in game, so all right, I guess I'll take Sir then. I am definitely past the rank of knight in MouseHunt. Good morning, Dave says, Beth, good morning as well. Hello, hello. Well, today is the first Feedback Friday, at least the first Feedback Friday I've done since the launch of Queso Geyser. So, of course, we're going to be looking for feedback, comments, questions, all things Geyser. Also want to fill hunters in with what we're currently working on as well. And that's a nice little segue because the thing that we're working on right now, the next thing to come out is Queso Geyser treasure maps. And also I just realized I meant to grab an image of a scroll case. Let me grab one of those. Let's go check that out. I forgot to do that. It is in this branch. The old convertibles. And let me see what we got here. Search the word geyser. Oh, you know what? No, I don't have easy access to it. I don't think it's actually in-game. It isn't uploaded yet. But it was kind of some cool-looking artwork. So I'll make myself smaller. Pokitty says, thank goodness for maps. Well, they're on their way. We're wrapping up the work, actually, on the Queso Geyser treasure map release. As always, player feedback is quite useful while we put together these maps. It gives us a chance to add map rewards to perhaps address any pain points that might exist in the area, as well as it gives us a good chance to kind of just generally look at it a second time, do any fixes, tweaks, and that sort of thing. So it kind of works well following up the main release with treasure maps. Now for Queso Geyser maps, there are going to be two types of maps released with the map release. The first is a Queso Geyser map, as you'd expect, containing nearly all the mice in the geyser. And there's also going to be a much longer Queso Canyon Grand Tour map, is what we're calling it. And it's going to task you with getting or tracking clues from 40 mice throughout the region. So that second one's going to take you to all 4 areas in the Queso Canyon region. Darn Wrong asks, nest dust in maps? Yes, there's a chance to find dust inside the rare chests. The Queso Geyser map, it contains 16 mice. It's always going to contain Calor Ignis, Storm Surge, and Bruticus, as well as a 50% chance of one of the other wildfire mice appearing, but you won't ever get all 3. So you'll always get Calor, and then there's a chance that you also get, I think it's, what is it, the Steam Scalded and the Corcator. I forget what the name of the pressure building one is. But there's a 50% chance that you might get a second wildfire mice on that map. Now, being a relatively short map, the rewards are somewhat modest, but no doubt they're still going to give you a good boost to your geyser hunting, as well as it's going to feel pretty natural just to be doing this map alongside your normal geyser runs. So with that in mind, the rewards are a little bit more modest. The rare chest contains 120,000 gold, though. It's nothing to bat an eye at. 90,000 points, 24 ancient charms. You also can find tonic, pump charms, and some other things as well. It'll feel somewhat comparable to the Queso Canyoneer map. Ember Scalded Stone, thank you, Brian. That is the name of the pressure building mouse that is attracted to wildfire. The larger Queso Canyon Tour map. Now that's going to span all 4 locations in the region. You have to grab a lot of the big name mice every time. There'll be Calor is going to be on those, Storm Surge, Bruticus, Queen Quesada, Inferno, and Nachos will appear on all of those maps, as well as a whole other mice, bringing the total count up to 40. Now the rewards for completing that map, because being a much longer map, they're a little more substantial. The rare chest will contain 200,000 gold. Along with the other usual rewards that you'd expect of ancient charms, you're going to find spices, tonic, pump charms, cork bark, and more inside that one. So it's a much more strenuous map. I don't know if strenuous is the right word, but lengthy map. It's a much larger one. It'll take you a little longer to complete, but the rewards are scaled up because of that. Now, if testing continues to go well, we expect to release the maps on Wednesday, May 22, so you can tentatively pencil that in on your calendar if you're excited for maps. We're just going to wrap up some testing, finalize a few things as well, but that's the plan if all goes according to plan. And that'll be a good, because I got lots of comments in the chat here. We'll go to Queso Geyser, questions and feedback. What do we got going here? We got Zappy asks, can we reduce the amount of Notchore to buy Baitkeep and Ultimate Charms? It's roughly balanced in line with how long it would take you to make an Ultimate Charm in the Living Garden. So it's to kind of maintain the status quo in terms of time investment. But certainly there's a perception. I think it's a much different perception because the Living Garden is nice little digestible chunks that you go in and you slowly build your way up to that eye essence. And so there's a more feeling of progression as you go. Even though it takes an extremely long time, it's lots of little steps. So it feels a lot less strenuous to go through that. Whereas with Notchore, there aren't really any steps. It's just go collect a lot, and it takes a very long time to get all that. And I think because it's one big step, it just feels that much longer. The Supreme Deer asks, how many bland queso on Rare Grand Tour? We're still kind of fine-tuning it. I think at the moment it is 25,000 bland queso is inside the Rare chest. Gabriel says, I had a lot of cheese, so the geyser's not too difficult. Just need the last cork and 3 mice before I figure out getting the new traps. Yeah, definitely a lot. It comes down to the bait. It's a bit of a old-style area, if you will. Where there's a lot of crafting and the progression is held through the bait, but then the corks as well sort of gate how quickly you can go as well. KDM, and the chat's moving around. KDM says, why doesn't the Dragon Slayer have the +1 Dragon Scale ability? Definitely noticed that was a popular question as well. So we avoided adding the effect of the Dragon Slayer cannon since its improved catch rate already results in it being able to collect Fulmina teeth much quicker than the Chrome Stormrot Ballista. So even though the Ballista averages more Dragon Scales looted per hunt, the cannon's improved catch rate against Fulmina results in more teeth looted overall. So if you want to break down some numbers and count a tooth drop as 600 Dragon Scales, because that's how much you can purchase a tooth for in the shop, the Slayer Dragon Cannon collects Dragon Scales about 16% faster than the Chrome Stormrot Ballista. So that's kind of, if you can think of it like a thought exercise, if instead of Fulmina dropping the tooth, she just dropped 600 scales, you'd collect scales 16% faster with the Slayer Cannon. Now that said, it seems to be feedback that's come up quite a bit after we chatted about it here at the office as well. I think there's a bit of a perception issue with the cannon not benefiting from an effect that is imbued upon the parts that it is constructed with, if that makes sense. So thematically, maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, even though mathematically it makes sense. So with that in mind, we're kind of still humming and hawing a little bit about the decision about whether we should add that effect to the trap. Another point being, too, that it makes it a little bit awkward for hunters who kind of have some value in that effect, but you also want to craft the trap. It makes the decision to craft the trap a little bit awkward, a little bit of anxiety there, because you feel like to get something, you also lose something. So with that in mind as well, we're kind of considering giving it that boost, especially when you consider how extremely rare and valuable that trap is to be able to get scales 32% faster, although that is quite a significant boost. It is also quite an elite piece of equipment, so maybe it needs quite that strong of a boost as well. And I've completely lost place in the chat now for sure. John asks, can leaves drop in bigger batches to build up cheese for Queso Geyser? It was all kind of balanced in terms of the existing rates and everything, so it's kind of an expansion added to the back. So it'd probably speed things up a little too much. It's kind of meant to take a little while. It's not the type of thing you jump in and you're done in 2 days. Jay says, we'll ever get a trap to craft using excess supplies we've gotten? It's tough, right? We don't want to ham-fist that in, do it for the sake of doing it. It has to kind of make good sense in both short and long term. So it's a bit of a challenge, but it's something on our mind if we can pull that off well. Maybe maybe the scale effect becomes a chance, says Dustin. That might be an interesting way to go about it. If it's a little bit too strong, we can still maintain the theme of it having the effect of the ballista because it's made from ballista parts, but then not be quite so powerful in terms of how many scales you can collect. Esgear says it kind of made sense to lose the effect though, considering it's an upgrade. Yeah, it is a different trap. It's no longer the ballista. I think where maybe there's a bit of a thematic problem is that it's made from the parts of a ballista. So, you know, I could see in some people's minds, well, why would it lose that effect? And other people would think, well, no, it's a different trap, so it doesn't have the same effect. Will there be an ultimate Dragonbane charm? None planned at the moment. Extreme is sort of the cutoff at the moment. Can we get a higher level pump, please? No plans to go higher than level 10, at least outside of maybe an event, a temporary event or something. Are there plans in the future for Fulmina to drop the items for Queso Geyser traps? Probably not. It might be just outside of her reach of loot that she has hoarded. I'd prefer a base to boost Leaves drop rate. I think it'd be quite some time before we made the area any quicker to complete. So typically, as the years go by, we do add some items into the game that speed up some older areas, and it's just from a sort of pragmatic standpoint. If you were to start MouseHunt tomorrow, and you've got 10 years of content in front of you, it might take you 2-3 years to experience everything. Which is quite a lofty goal in terms of how long you would play a video game for. So we often kind of compress some of the areas that have been out a while, especially the ones that block progression towards reaching the end game to be able to play with friends as well, without diminishing accomplishments either as we go. So it'll be quite some time, I think, with it being a brand new area before we add items to the game that make it go a lot faster, especially considering it has some, currently the best in-game traps for a few power types. It'll be a while before we make it anywhere sort of trivial to go through it, if ever. Can we have other mice drop frozen scrolls, maybe in rift areas? I'd assume that's to make Dragonbane charms. Remember that you can get Dragonbane charms in the Trapsmith at Queso Geyser, and that might be a little bit more reliable way to get them, or entertaining way to get them, than hunting the Acolyte. And as well as for your Grand Duke, you can purchase them using your Dragon Scales in Mosu Picchu. So there are other ways, higher level ways of getting Dragonbane charms. Add Solidified Amber Queso to the HUD like Notcher so it's easier to track without going to our inventory. Yeah, that's something that we've been a bit on the fence about. Be interesting to hear other thoughts and feedback as well. We don't want to kind of have information overload on the HUD for something that you don't typically need to use all that often, but it would be kind of neat to have a spot to give you the feedback. Oh, hey, you can afford something right now. I know myself, typically what I do is I load the shop really quick, and then right at the top there'll be something that requires Amber Queso, and that says you own beside it. That's how I quickly check how much I have. The rub says it currently takes 125 hunts to get just enough blank queso for one batch of wildfire, and that might be good actually to answer another sort of FAQ that came up, and that was what cheese works best in the various eruption phases of Queso Geyser, as well as suggestions. Hey, can you add to the HUD some hints or some indicators of like this cheese here, please? But the decision of what cheese to use where, it's quite often influenced by the type of resources and equipment that you have available to you. So the answer will be slightly different for every hunter. Certainly you might be approaching it if you're sitting on 50 bait keeps. Your strategy might be a little bit different from somebody who has 0. Likewise, if you have tons of Notchor and Dragonbane charms, you might have a bit of a different answer to that question than somebody else. So with that in mind, we don't want to put that information directly in the HUD because it's something that should be left up to the player to decide, well, what's my best strategy here based on what I have available to me. Now that said, generally speaking, spicier queso is better results. So I mean, that's kind of a truth no matter what phase you're in. If you use spicier cheese, you get more cork. But the question, or the thing that each hunter needs to decide is the time that I invest in crafting that cheese worth the return that I get when I arm it? And I think maybe the mistake a lot of people are making are overvaluing how much wildfire they should be hunting with. So for sure, it's a very exciting moment to get a nest full of 80 catches of Calor, but whether that's the most time-efficient way to go about getting the trap part drops, probably not. You spend so long making the wildfire that you're better off just doing multiple flaming runs, and you'll end up getting your trap parts much quicker that way. That said, because the wildfire has a decent drop rate from Calor, it's sort of the standard deviation is is quite wider, or the different outcomes that can happen. So there's a chance you get nothing. There might be like a 10-15% chance that you go through and you don't get loot from Calor, or at least a trap loot. But then there's also a chance you might get 5 or 6, and it's just kind of the way where that drop rate lies in. It opens the door to it not being completely unreasonable to expect to get a lot. But you also might get 0. Whereas when you're hunting with flaming cheese and you're hunting storm surge, the drop rate is fairly low, to the point where you're going to expect maybe 1 drop every 3 eruptions or so that you do. And so the deviation is much tighter there. Typically everyone gets 0, 1, and maybe if you're lucky 2, whereas the deviation is quite wide with Calor, where you might get 0, you might get 6. So it's a little bit more of an exciting moment, but it's not necessarily the most time-efficient way to go about it. Now, for any hunters struggling as well, kind of rough rule of thumb maybe you could use for Queso Geyser is medium and hot are probably the most time-efficient choice for collecting cork bark. So you probably don't want to be using mild. Even flaming's a little bit overkill in terms of how long it took you to make the cheese versus how much bark you're getting back. But again, it kind of comes down to what your stockpiles currently are and your resources and traps available to you. Mild and medium queso will work pretty well for small eruptions, both building up the pressure and looting them. You'll get some pretty good results and a good return in terms of cork materials looted and time spent collecting the cheese. Medium works well for medium, hot works well for large, and flaming works well for epic. So it's a very kind of 1-to-1. You can kind of think mild for small, medium, hot, large, flaming, epic. You can kind of think of it that way. That said, medium's not that hard to get, so I found myself while playtesting I would use medium in a small quite frequently. Now wildfire, that's a bit of a different beast altogether, and everyone has to kind of decide when and how they want to use wildfire. But it should definitely be used occasionally at your discretion if you're looking for sort of maximize the amount of your efficiency in terms of time spent versus reward gained. Bruticus needs a buff in loot. Its main purpose, there are a couple different sort of categories of mice that you get in the geyser. Some of them are themed for geyser parts, some of them are themed for leaves. And the ones that drop leaves are themed, or they kind of have their best encounter rate with the cheese below it, if that makes sense. So Bruticus is there to kind of cash out a little bit of your flame. It also controls the drop rate of the other mice in the pool. It was a little bit, maybe a better way to handle it than just dropping the catch rate on those mice a little bit. And typically those other spice mice, they'll drop so if you hunt with medium, you'll attract a mice that will drop some hot leaves to kind of help you make the jump up to the next type of cheese. But Bruticus is nowhere near as hard to encounter as Storm Surge, because you can get it even in a small eruption. You can just arm your flaming and Bruticus shows up. So with that in mind, he couldn't be super rewarding, or there might be a bit of an odd meta strategy to repeat your small eruptions over and over and just farm Bruticus. So it kind of had to be a little bit mediocre, but in terms of points and gold, though, I think it's still pretty good. It just kind of fills out the epic and the large eruptions. Michael says, add a way to see how much pressure each cheese builds on the HUD for the app, like the web app. Yeah, we struggled a little bit to find a spot, but that's a good suggestion. I'll kind of write that down as well. Mobile app needs a way to... It's unfortunate that we don't get the advantage of tooltips and hover states on mobile like we do on a desktop browser. So it's often a little bit restricting in terms of how easily we can display different types of information. Dark Memora says, why so much variance in epic loot range? Lottery is fun but disappointing is fun for a few but disappointing for many. It's just a kind of a side effect of what the drop rate is, because it's a pretty decent drop rate, but it's not a really high drop rate. And so that kind of just has the effect of making us a wide set in terms of the deviation of expected outcomes. Now hindsight, and it'd be interesting to hear what hunters think, maybe a system whereby the drop rate is still really low, but every 50th catch is guaranteed to drop something. That would have helped kind of smooth it out a little bit. And so that was an idea that came up in hindsight to try to make things a little bit more consistent, but still have those exciting moments where you get 2 or 3. It also have the effect of if you did do a whole 80 run with Wildfire, if every 50 catches you drop something, then you will get a drop every time you use 80 pieces of Wildfire and capture 80 times. So it's something we might keep in mind for future areas. It sounds somewhat similar to what we did in the Bristlewoods Rift, where as you earn King's Crowns for the Absolute Acolyte, the loot rate gets buffed a little bit. So if you've been unlucky, you can kind of unlock the ability to get a better drop rate. Sitting in Queso River for 2 solid weeks for the 80 Wildfire. Queso is painful. Again, that's your choice to make, though. So you might want to consider how much or how often you want to be using Wildfire. Certainly, all things considered, if you have unlimited Wildfire, of course it's the best cheese to use, but you might be overvaluing it a little bit. So you might be spending too much time pumping and not enough time in the geyser. So I would suggest maybe use some flaming and just sprinkle in the Wildfire. Keep in mind that when you do your epic runs, you will get some roots and some stones as well. So that's kind of a nice way to pepper in some Wildfire when you get a trickle of bland queso. Eating KFC ribs before you collect your epic Wildfire loot helps rib chat, says KDM. I'll take your word for it. Bruticus doesn't give enough rewards to warrant farming. Keep in mind that you don't need to be in an epic eruption to capture Bruticus, and so that's why his rewards are a little bit lower, because you can get him during a small eruption. And so if it was too generous, it would create a weird kind of meta strategy where players would just do small eruptions all day long, because Bruticus would be very time efficient, because you wouldn't have to build up higher levels of corks. Maybe have the info in mobile app in a question mark. That's one way to do it. Maybe a little lookup table, kind of when you're building pressure, a quick little button you can tap just to reference the amount of pressure you get from each mouse. Can OESB 50% more bland queso work on pump charms? I don't know if I know that acronym. Can you give an estimated range for rib to drop with 55 to 65 calories fully tonic? It would be under 1. Jacob mentioned the Chrome kit is not LE. The previous Chrome kit going to come back. Yeah, all of the Chrome upgrade kits, none of them are LE, so they will all kind of slowly come back. 80 Wildfire plus 80 Ultimate Charms, no purple loot. There is a chance that can happen. Like I said, it might be better to not go all in with Wildfire. You might want to use some more flaming. Stejan says, now the game has been introduced to the trap research crafting system of the Dragon Slayer Canada's moon. We could get a new super trap in between now and the Archduke area. Yeah, it was just kind of an interesting, it'd be nice to know what players thought of that. Just we snuck that trap in there in a different way. Keep it a little bit of the mystery, kind of inspired by the Molten Shrapnel base of so long ago, if you were playing around the time that base came out. It was a little bit of a mystery community item for players to find. That said, of course, we wanted some good hints in there. It'd be like if you went to an escape room and there were locks, as you are in an escape room, for some reason there's locks on every single thing, and instead of any hints on the combinations, they said, well, just start guessing. I don't think anyone would come back to that escape room. I think they'd go out of business pretty quick. So we did want a few hints here and there, and it was good to see hunters pick up on the hints and figure it out. What is the ETA for a hunter to obtain all 4 traps when building this area? It's in the months range. It is very similar to the Warpath. We want the rib, though. Yeah, that's definitely, you can only get the rib when you hunt with Wildfire. So that is something to keep in mind. That said, it's probably unlikely to happen, so it's part of the choice of making what you want to, or how you want to spend your resources. What's up?
Hello. I like that you had to choose between a couple of boxes.
Oh, I was going to use 2, but I just went with 1.
Snake oil. How's everyone doing today? What you talking about, Dave?
Queso Geyser.
Ah, delicious.
What's cracking?
I just wanted to come pay a little visit, interrupt, yeah, how it goes. KDM said Geo, I think, before I even arrived on scene, I think because he saw you do this. I was like, oh, that must mean something.
We're driving
Hello,
to the Geo.
everybody.
I can.
I was on some maps and I had some spare dust. I kept getting invited, and it was queso now, like obviously not the geyser maps.
Canyoneers.
So it was essentially just leaching. I was like, all right, I'll dust each time. So I just like had this little like.
Hey,
quick
can't be
run.
mad if somebody dusts it at
Yeah,
least.
it's like, hey, I'm not hunting, but I dusted, so.
That's the least you could do.
Yeah. Cool. So, yeah, just wanted to take a little walk.
Take a walk on,
I got
on
some-
the wild side?
On the wild.
On the wildfire side?
Hey, baby, take a walk on the wild side. It's a Bob. It's not Bob Dylan, is it? No, it's like Normand. Beck.
I don't think it's Beck, no.
Come on.
I said, hey,
Van
kid,
Morrison.
take a walk on the wild side.
Talk a walk.
Yeah, whatever.
Just all right. Well, I've got work to do, and I'm sure you have some things to go over. I missed the Quar though, but
The Quar, it's a good one today.
Is it?
You would know the answer.
Hold on,
It's a good
Let me
good
read it.
reward link though.
Oh. Well, I don't
We'll
know.
see.
I didn't know the answer because that's different than what we thought it was. Remember how the oopsie doops?
Oh,
math?
yeah, because it ended up
So
changing
for
at
me,
the end
it
there.
was different anyway. Yeah.
We'll see.
What?
So some other interesting feedback we were looking for is, should bland queso no longer attract... You take it off? All right, take it easy. So a bit of a feedback question for the chat about the geyser and bland queso, how it fits into there. Should bland queso no longer attract mice at the geyser? So in case you haven't tried it, you can use bland queso when you're collecting cork. So the very first step of the geyser is collecting the cork bark, and that's the only time that you can actually arm your bland queso and attract a mouse. Now the only mouse you attract when you do that is the fuzzy drake mouse, which has an absolutely abysmal drop rate of cork to the point where it's pretty well zero. Now the fuzzy drake mouse existed so that we could add it to the encounter pool depending on what cheese you're using to help kind of control and balance the drop rates with the various types of cheese. Or in other words, it's kind of the mouse that you're not really excited to ever encounter because it doesn't really drop cork. But that way we could mix it in with the other cheese to help control the drop rate. It's kind of an extra variable in the equation that we needed. So for consistency though, we left it so you could arm your bland queso and the only mouse you get is the fuzzy drake. That said, it is an absolutely horrible decision and strategy to ever do that outside of maybe either when maps are added and you need a fuzzy drake, you'll get it immediately. Or if you're working on a king's crown, you could arm 100 bland and be like, okay, cool, I crowned the mouse. But what we've noticed is we've gotten some negative feedback from hunters saying the cork bark drop rate is horrible. What is wrong with you guys? I'm going to be here for 3 weeks before I have enough to build any of my corks, and we check it out and they're hunting with bland for some reason. So we were wondering, should it maybe just not work? Should we add some sort of subtle warning message? I mean, nothing too in your face in case you're doing it for a map or a king's crown. But just a little heads up like, yo, this isn't the best idea. Ben says just the one mouse is fine. Peter says, yeah, that makes sense. I tried 10 bland, I got 0 mats. Yeah, it's basically 0%. I think it's maybe a 2% chance to get cork bark. And it's just a nature of bland queso. When you upgrade your pump, you can get over 200 of it every single hunt. So you would never run out of cheese. And so with that in mind, of course, it doesn't really do anything all that useful. Leave bland, but put some kind of reminder in the HUD. Yeah, I'm kind of leaning that way too, because I don't want to necessarily take away the ability to earn a king's crown that much easier. I'm sure some hunters got started on that goal and wouldn't like it removed, or some people who did that and then they felt like, oh, I missed out on that chance to get a king's crown a little easier. Give a warning, leave as is, but add a warning, just a warning. All right, that seems to be a pretty unanimous in the chat there. That should be a warning. People ask for Calor to be attracted to bland. I don't know if that would check out. That might make it a little too easy. Works well for crown hunters, says Michelle. Yeah, so I think leaning towards maybe we'll leave that as is, but we'll just add some better feedback to make sure that the players that aren't quite figuring out that on their own, to give them a little bit more feedback of like, hey, this really isn't meant to hunt with unless you're doing a niche side goal. So I think maybe that's just kind of a feedback problem from the HUD. George says, I don't think you even need to have a warning. Well, that's the thing, though. I've seen quite a few hunters just hunting with the bland, and I don't think they were hunting a king's crown. So I think there are enough kind of people not quite getting the hint, so it needs a little more something in game to let you know. Ryan asks, how to toggle a tiny eruption? I'm curious. So the way the corks work, when you build a cork and you have so many hunts to reach a certain threshold, if you don't reach that threshold, you'll still always cause an eruption. It just won't be the one associated with that pressure value. So if you're trying to do a medium and you fail, it'll cause a small. If you're trying to do a small and you fail, it'll cause a tiny. Even if you have zero pressure, you'll still get a tiny eruption. But the loot is not particularly exciting in the tiny. So how you would do it is you'd have to be using the wrong power type or be extremely unlucky. It's pretty hard to trigger a tiny without purposefully doing something wrong. But if you don't reach the minimum requirement for a small eruption, when you run out of hunts, a tiny will occur. Mark says, we've been trained to use bland queso to start in each of the 3 areas, so you may presume, yeah, that's a good point as well. It might be that you're kind of following the pattern. When you first start out an area, you always use bland to start building up some momentum, at least with the plains and the quarry. So maybe I could see that as same hunter's finger oil. Aren't I supposed to do this? I'm supposed to start with bland. So a little feedback to let you know, hey, this is different from the quarry and the plains. It's kind of the above and beyond. Okay, you've mastered those 3 areas. Now can you pull them all together and manage all those resources? Sejin says, have the devs considered to put tonic as a buyable for Notchore now that can be used more wisely? We did right from the beginning, but it became very, very challenging to balance because tonic can be used to get you more Notchore. So if you can use Notchore to get tonic, it was very hard to come up with a number that was, or a cost that was interesting and still balanced. So we really tried hard to make it work, and we couldn't. And that's actually when we had the idea for queso pump charms, and they got added to the shop for Notchore instead. But unfortunately, because tonic gets you Notchore can't get you tonic, or it's just kind of too hard to work out a way to make that interesting. That's we did add them to the maps as sort of a tertiary way to get a trickle of tonic coming into the economy. Yeah, and then Spigar says right after they end up getting unlimited tonics for every hunt that matters. That's another good point as well. Tonic is extremely potent in some. There's a lot of scenarios. If you just have 10 of it, you can use it strategically and really get a lot of bang for your buck just using 1 or 2. And so again, like when we looked at what the cost would have to be in Notchore, it was astronomical that it would just look silly to ever actually buy it. So we left it out then. Darn Wrong says, any update on auto resetting accept supplies from stranger settings? We're still trying to track that down. We've had a lot of difficulty replicating the issue, but we are tracking it. We have a bug report going for it. Ryan says, fail to catch at all 10 hunts. Yes, it would be, I assume you're referencing a tiny eruption. That would do it for sure. If you arm the wrong power type and you put a small cork in the geyser and you take 10 hunts, you'll get a tiny eruption. And the only mouse you can encounter, I believe, is the mild spicekin, if that's the name of it. And it'll drop you medium leaves, but it's kind of a waste of time to do it intentionally anyway, so I wouldn't recommend it. Ben says, maybe leave 1 bland mouse and then add it to the scoreboard for people who like me. I mean, I don't know, though. I don't know if I'd want to encourage someone to do something so unproductive anyway, at least not officially. How to trigger tiny rewind charms. Yeah, you could do it. Certainly do it quickly using rewind charms. Excuse me. Need a cough button on this. Session says, better use as getting out your epic eruption faster. Yeah, that's true. If you're a little impatient to get your epic started, it's an interesting use for the rewind charms. I like the rewind charms for the golem event. It's kind of an interesting way to really get a quick start going, because the way that event is set up, the sooner you get some high-level golems going, it just really pays off in the end, right? That's the longer you can farm stuff with high-level golems. So the rewind charms that's probably the best time to use them, I'd say, is right at the start of the golem event, so that you can enjoy higher-level golems for a longer period of time. Destin says, have Larry pop up and give some cheesy advice when arming bland. Yeah, I'm leaning towards that. Maybe something, I think it has to be something subtle in the HUD, because you might be doing a map, and you might be like, you know what, I want a gold crown on this mouse, I got 500 bland, I'm just going to sit here and do 500 hunts. Hopefully, I don't think it can be something too scary in your face, you shouldn't be doing this, but just a little reminder, like, okay, you know what you're doing? Cool. It could be Larry popping up and going, you know what you're doing? Cool. KDM says an overgrown Ember base upgrade to require a Geyser loot and allow 100% boost to bland queso. Yeah, that's an interesting suggestion as well. Something to kind of, as an alternative to having a higher level pump in item that would give it a further boost. Swift says use Ember Queso plus Nacho plus Tonic. That's interesting, actually. No, but again, though, your Tonic can get you Amber Queso. So we typically run into a problem if the resource you're using gets you this other resource, then that resource can't give you more of the first resource, or it kind of trips over itself a bit. What rewards can we expect from Queso Geyser maps? They are quite varied. Let me open up my spreadsheet here. Went over them a little earlier when we were talking about maps, but here I'll drill down again. It's a bit of a work in progress. We haven't quite finished playtesting it yet, but it's good to get feedback as we go as well. So the Geyser maps, they're relatively short, so they have a little bit more modest rewards. In the rare chest, there's 120,000 gold, 90,000 points, 24 ancient charms, 5,000 bland queso, and then you find some tonic every time you do one. You also find some pump charms every time you do one, and you get a little bit of bark. Then you get a spice. You get then a random item that could include Dragon Bane's Ultimate Power and Magic Essence. And then there's a last slot that has some jackpot items in it. For the Grand Tour map that we're adding as well, it's going to cover the entire region. You're going to go to the River, Plains, Quarry, and the Geyser. Much more substantial, 40 mice, 200,000 gold, 140,000 points, 40 ancient trinkets. This is the rare chest, by the way. You always get flaming, so you always get the best spice. You always get some wildfire ingredients. Right now we have 25,000 bland in there, so there's enough bland to make a batch of wildfire. You always get tonic, you always get pump charms, you always get some bark. Then there is an extra item that could include Dragon Bane charms, Super Dragon Bane charms, Ultimate Power charms, Magic Essence. And then there is a last jackpot slot. Actually, it's not quite a jackpot slot. It has a pretty good chance to get Magic Cork Dust. If you don't get Magic Cork Dust, you might get nothing, or you might get a jackpot item. They're all fairly low chance to get things like trap parts, Ember Charm as well as on there, Bait Keeps, and Ultimates. Whew. It's a lengthy list. My throat is a little dry. Ribs in the map. No, the only way to get a rib is from Calor. With the amount of blank queso in the game, you need new crowns, like 10,000. Yeah, it wouldn't be particularly challenging, I guess. It would be time intensive, that's for sure. And that's a challenge in and of itself. But you could definitely rack up as many fuzzy drake catches as you want. It's not hard at all to get 100% catch rate, and you have unlimited cheese to hunt it with. I meant to say fuel. I don't know if I know what you mean by fuel. Your message above was deleted, so maybe that's why I'm confused. Poke Kitty says, you mentioned Nest Dust could drop from rare maps. Is that for the Grand Tour or also the regular Geyser? It is the Grand Tour, and I think it's in the Geyser. Let me double check. Yes, it is in the Geyser one. It is not quite as abundant, though. You're twice as likely to get it from the Grand Tour than you are from the Geyser. CPU fan is coming on. Laptop's loving encoding video. Were there any other two? I wrote down beforehand some FAQ that came up. Did we not go over things? So we went over, should bland queso be required? That was a feedback question. We went over why the Dragon Slayer, or we were considering giving the Dragon Slayer the Dragon Scale effect, and why initially we weren't quite sure if we wanted to go that, make that powerful of an upgrade. We went over, no, we didn't go. So a question I saw come up quite a bit was, why does the Dragon Slayer cannon require chrome parts and not the regular ballista parts? And it was just to kind of basically maintain the status quo. So before Geyser existed, to have the best Draconic Trap, you needed a chrome upgrade kit. And then after Geyser, to have the best Draconic Trap, you need an upgrade kit. So I think if it was regular parts, there would still be some frustrations around, hey, I bought this kit and I upgraded my trap, and then it got surpassed fairly quickly, which from past experience, was not the most pleasant perception. Then we went over what cheese works best in the various phases. Oh, another question I saw come up quite a bit was, what is the best cheese to attract Corky the Collector? And I think many hunters have deduced that spicier queso attracts Corky more often. Flaming is your best shot at Corky. Hot has a pretty good chance. In medium, it's a long shot, but he will show up. Mild, can't get him at all. Bland, of course, can't get him at all. And Wildfire, not attracted to Wildfire, because I think you'd be a little sad if he came and ate your Wildfire cheese. Jackpot as well. Now that's exciting. Yeah, similar to the Warpath maps, there's a chance to get Warpath loot when you're doing Warpath maps. There's a chance to get trap loot from the Geyser and the Grand Tour maps. Can we get ribs from the nest mystery slot? So when you dust a nest, no. You can find the other trap parts. You can get stones, chisels, and... oh, what are those called? Geysers? Those are called thermal springs. That's what they are. Little tiny thermal springs. Often, when I was checking that out, I was wondering how the mouse carried that without it breaking, but that's part of the mystique, I guess. Stesian says on the tonic issue, can't you make tonic too expensive and not sure to be useful in the quarry, but give some spare quarry mats to use in the geyser that way? But give some spare quarry mats in the geyser that way. Not sure if I follow you. For sure there would be a way to make tonic available for Notchor at a high enough price that you would not come back or wouldn't come close to getting back the tonic that you put in. But it was a pretty big number, so I can still kind of think it over. It would just work better if it was an item that didn't require or you didn't get by using tonic. Ryan says, can there be additional features for the Overgrown Ember stone base to use in the geyser, like a random drop? That's interesting as well. It would kind of make it a little less painful to have that base armed while you are collecting bark or something. It will work with queso pump charms, so if you have some queso pump charms and you arm that base, probably the best time to do is when you're collecting cork, because once you start building pressure, and especially in eruption, you probably want to go a stronger base. That said, that base is pretty good, but if you're a higher level, if you're a Grand Duke or something, you probably have a slightly stronger base. Brian says the epic mystery dust slot only gives 10 pump charms, but can also give 20 extreme. Can we buff the pump charm? 10 is underwhelming. It's basically only 2k blank K, so that's a fair enough point. Just kind of balanced in terms of what you can get there. That's something to consider, that maybe buff the amount of pump charms you can get. Poke Kitty says, what is magic cork dust? When you claim your nest, you can use a dust item, and it will give you +5 items to your nest, and they're all usually pretty good items. Especially if you use it for the large and the epic. You get a lot of flaming leaves as well. That'll kind of help you sustain yourself quite a bit. Get a good amount of bland as well. Use amber queso for upgrades of the queso pump. That's an interesting suggestion of kind of gating it a little bit, and you can put it into overdrive. What about higher level pump per rank? That's interesting as well. I like some of these interesting suggestions. Write that down. We were looking for ways to kind of, maybe not so much an account area, but as we look to Archduke and above areas, depending on how many players there are, ways to incorporate different things you can do at different titles all within the same area, so you can you can hunt with friends that are of lower title. But there's still kind of some nice niche bonuses as well you get for a higher hunter's title. Is it safe to collect queso directly from erupting geyser? Much too hot. Got to be careful. That's why you got to wait for it to subside and see what is in the nest. Too dangerous to go out there amongst all the molten cheese. Darn Wrong says actually there's no need for more ways to generate blank queso. Instead, there should be more leaves dropped by various mice. A lot of players already have tons of blank queso just sitting around. It is kind of the main bottleneck. As I was going through it quite a bit, sometimes I would spend about 20 to 30% of my time pumping the queso. So I don't think the leaves are necessarily the biggest time commitment. The bland is very careful how you spend that resource. I think it comes down to though how much wildfire you want to use. So if you find yourself just never have enough blank queso, just tone back the wildfire a little bit, and you might find yourself you come out ahead over the course of a few weeks. You end up with a lot more rewards than you did if you kind of grind it out wildfire and do a big wildfire run. Bland queso gets burned rapidly from wildfire, though. Yeah, and that's kind of always how it's been set up, even when, even in the initial river, was wildfire was that thing. If you ever had too much, it would just remove it all. And so the same thing holds true for the geyser. It's kind of there when you have too much bland queso. It's not necessarily meant to be, okay, you should use wildfire 100% of the time. But again, like how much you sprinkle in there is a different choice for every hunter, depending on sort of their supplies, their hunting styles, how passive they like to go, whether you're the type of hunter who enjoys spending some nice passive hunting to build up a good supply of stuff and then see what you get for it. On that note as well, time has flown by, and I haven't gotten to a couple other quick points I wanted to make, fill you in on some other things that we're working on. So just quickly, I wanted to make mention of a marketplace follow-up that we're working on. So we're doing some updates to the marketplace. After the new marketplace update came out, we got a lot of great feedback. We were kind of documented, wrote all that down. We put together a milestone to work on. Just loaded up with tasks of lots of quality of life improvements, little fixes as well. Some things are a little bit off. Interface improvements. One of the most requested changes was to display the tariff with more clarity, to easily determine how much you need to list an item for to undercut the current lowest bid. So we're addressing that. We're putting we're displaying prices with the tariff pretty well everywhere, so that'll be a lot less confusing. Is when you see a price, you know that's with the tariff. And then when you're going to sell something, there are two fields, and you can fill in either or. You can fill in you will get or they will pay. And so if you fill in the they will pay field, you know when you're looking at an offer and somebody is selling, let's say Super Brie, and they're selling it for $10,000 a piece, you can fill in the they pay field and put 999, and you know, bam, I am now the lowest offer on the marketplace. Super easy to figure out. When you fill in the 999, the you will get will just auto-populate and do the calculation to see like, okay, they'll pay this and you will receive this. So that makes it a lot easier to handle the tariff, I think. It's been working pretty well in testing, kind of gave a run through of it. We imported actually all of the marketplace data from live into a tested environment as well, so we could test it with real numbers of how the marketplace looks. And so that helped quite a bit as well. And I think part of when we're putting it together, we had a lot of test data, and so it just didn't feel real enough, and we didn't get the right kind of feedback. Some other tweaks and changes here to list off. Some of them are kind of minor things. You can click the item thumbnails pretty well throughout the entire marketplace. Hopefully we didn't miss anywhere. If you click the image of an item, it'll take you to the page for that item. There's just kind of some weird spots where you click it, nothing would happen. Smoothed out how the back button works. There was some kind of weirdness where you'd click back and it would go back to like the home page instead of going back in the workflow you're on. You can search through your history by name. You can also see much further back in your history. I believe you can see every single thing now. It can filter out items with no recent activity, so when you're searching through the various items that can be sold on the marketplace, you can check off a box and it'll hide all the items that no one has bought or sold recently. You can easily repeat an order from the history section, so you just click a button and it'll take you to the screen with all the numbers filled in, so you can just boom, submit, and you can repeat the exact same order you did in the past. Added some warning messages when you're buying or selling for a price that's far off from the average. Larry pops up and goes, hey, sure about that? I don't know. Can better manage notifications, so to choose between being notified when a listing fully completes or if you still want to get a notification every single time somebody buys or sells something. More prominent display of current average price for an item, so that's in much bigger text. It's closer. I think it's just under the item thumbnail image now, so you can see that at all times while you're making a buy and sell offer. It's just a nice little piece of info to have on the screen. Fix some bugs related to rounding certain price points. Unfortunately, in the world of JavaScript, floating point math is quite a headache, and the tariff is a calculated field, but we smoothed out some of that, as well as lots of little layout tweaks, changes, bug fixes. It'll look very familiar, but some things have been updated. Another note to make about the tariff actually as well, when you list something, if your listing appears in that in the table of the top 5 or however many are at the bottom, you'll see your display picture in that row and it gets highlighted. You can hover over it and it says you have a listing to sell this much for that, so you can see exactly where you are in that short list. Whew! That was a lot to go over. Ben says, shout out to Cardboard Shark. Yes, Andrew has been working quite diligently on that, kind of rounding out all the corners. Today we're just wrapping up sort of our internal alpha testing of the changes. Next week, we're going to get a group of players as well to get some more feedback, kind of let them go through in a test environment with some gold and all that production data, the marketplace, to see how it works. We'll get final feedback, then one more week to address any feedback, concerns, final tweaks, that sort of thing. And if everything goes according to plan, we hope to have the update ready to launch toward the end of this month. So hopefully by the end of May, we have those marketplace updates good to go, unless some big showstopper comes up. Zapaki says 50 wildfire for theme scrap is really a lot. Definitely kind of feedback is heard loud and clear on that. I think we'll avoid any sort of really high benchmark on a journal theme like that going forward. But I don't think we're going to change it because it's just a little bit awkward now that so many people have set out and accomplished that. To then sort of make it easier is a little bit awkward as well. Silver lining, if you do the Queso Geyser Grand Tour maps, Queen Quesada is on those maps, and you will get some wildfire ingredients when you finish those maps. So it's kind of a way to chip away at that goal even while you're doing the geyser. Destin says, what about page not refresh when you change tab? Yes, that has been addressed as well. So in the world of computer science, it's called memoization. When you store a value and then don't ask for it again until a certain amount of time or until something has changed. So we kind of ditched all that, and every time you navigate and you view a page, it's going to fetch the latest data, so everything should be right up to date unless you look at it, walk away from your computer, and come back a few minutes later without navigating or touching any buttons. All the prices should be much more up to date. Herrick says if you make use of Lunar New Year event, you can easily stockpile quite a bit of wildfire. That's definitely a good candidate to use the lantern on. Stockpiling some wildfire, or definitely the golems as well, is a good time to get a little stockpile of land going. And remember, it's a permanent area, so it's definitely kind of meant to be very long term. Years down the road, there's still sort of a demand for some of these trap loots and stuff. So it's definitely not something meant to be wrapped up and you're all done with it in a week or two. It's kind of a year-long mission, if you will, in terms of the greater game economy. KDM says Valor Rift this year. Yeah, I won't go into too much detail, I guess, because this is running pretty long now. But we're up and running. We're already working on the Valor Rift. Some mice have been completed. Maybe on a future Feedback Friday, we can give a little sneak peek at some of the art. I'm sure Jacob as well, he'll probably be live painting some of those mice over the next coming weeks, I would think, because he's tasked up with some of those. But yeah, it's up and running. Got a preliminary little bit of a spreadsheet started. That's often kind of the first step. We're spending about 3 weeks doing sort of prototype version 2, if you will. So we've prototyped the area in quite a few iterations. And now we're actually basically building a prototype, but in the game itself. Now that we have a better sense of direction for it, and that's going to help guide some of the final decisions. And our goal is at the end of this 3-week sprint to have a much better sense of exactly how the area is going to unfold. And then we're going to map out some more of the finalized plans of how we're going to go about developing it. But we do have the art underway. James says, thanks for adding the limited edition items, slots, and trap skins and collectibles. I'm not sure where that popped up, but that might have been a nice little quality of life thing that got snuck in with the geyser. Quar time. Yes, let's move on to Quar as well. We got question answer reward, as Giorgio has dubbed it. Today's trivia question is the ever so rare trivia question where the answer is not a number. And the trivia question is, what's so special about the number 415 at Queso Geyser? And anyone who figured out the Dragon Slayer canon research, I think deduced what was so special about 415. Sum of all cork requirements, Peter is correct. It is the sum of all materials required to create all 4 corks. So if you add up the amount of cork, geyserite, tungsten, and congealed rubber, had trouble thinking of the last one there, it equals 415. So That is the mystery specialness of 415. Put the reward link in the chat. I'm pretty sure if you're watching this recorded, you can see the chat next to the video. So it's chilling out, waiting for you there as well. And an anagram in the Chrome Stormrot Ballista part hint. Yes, we snuck a little anagram inside the Chrome Stormrot Ballista part, so when you smashed it, there's a little bit of a hint at the number. So it's kind of good that some keen-eyed, eagle-eyed hunters spotted that as well. Brian says, waiting for rib. Oh dear. Yep, there's 3 ribs in that reward link. The claim limit is set to 2, so congrats for the first 2 people that clicked the link. No, just kidding. It's Dragonbane charms and some bland queso that you can share with friends. Getting hungry with all this talk of ribs, though. That'll be the new one. It'll be no longer temporal shadow plates, no longer sandblasted metal will be the joke of what the reward link typo was today. It'll be ribs. Rib is the new temporal shadow plate. It is probably the rarest item in the game now. I think it dethroned temporal shadow plates. Vince City says, any plans to put queso in the daily chests? Potentially in the future. Maybe mild or medium or something like that. The bland queso, because we can't change the quantity of cheese that you get from the chest based on the cheese you selected. So it'd have to be something that's a little bit more valuable than the bland. But we typically it's a bit of a mechanism to compress older areas or speed up the game. So somebody's starting from scratch right now, they can kind of catch up to their friends a little sooner. Maybe not with all the above and beyond achievements, but they can kind of go through that main canonical storyline to get to Hollow Heights a little quicker. And now the Geyser kind of puts an end to that whole the whole kind of arc that started with Law. Everything meets back up at Hollow Heights, and now we're kind of positioned to add more areas that go beyond Machu Picchu, minus the rift that we're working on, because the rifts are kind of on their own as well. 0.1% chance of ribs. I forget what the actual rate is, to be honest. It's low. Oh, I guess I had the spreadsheet open. Such a big spreadsheet now. No, it's higher than that. I'll let hunters deduce the exact rarity, but it's not quite that rare. It's under 1%, but it's not 1 in 1,000, though. Rarest item is still that leftover rock. Yeah, that's up there as well. Temporal Shadow Rib, says Destin. I don't know why, that just makes me laugh, the theme of seeing a Temporal Shadow Rib. Ryan says, I can craft the new Hydro and Tactical traps, but the gold are so much to spend. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of kept in line with some of the other comparable traps, so that they all have very similar costs from the Trapsmith. Keep in mind as well, not in the short term by any means, but the trap loot can be sold back to the Trapsmith, I think for around 100,000 gold each, so not that that is a good idea at the moment, but at some point in the future, why can I never remember the name of the hydro component? The thermal springs. They can't be worth less than that. Will Law ever be further developed in the future, asks Swift. Yes, as part of the Archduke, the current idea anyway. Obviously, it's much too soon to say with any concrete certainty, but as part of a future Archduke area, we're looking to include Law. We know Crow member Prison Corps. I don't know if we have any plans for that in the immediate future. Ryan says, I can craft... Oh, I'm rereading the same part of the chat. KDM's budging up now. Is it, well, 0.2% then? I think it's higher than that, too. It's not that abysmally low. That would just be, that would be non-existent. That would be statistically insignificant. Peter's cooking. Oh, we are at an hour. What am I doing? What am I doing? It's a bad call, too. My throat is a little dry. I was a little under the weather last Friday, and I feel like it's still lingering around me a little bit. So speaking for an hour straight was probably a very poor decision, but we'll see. Any summary today, says KDM. Yes, I have some notes, so I'll be able to post a summary. That said, I better take off so I can do said thing, as I can make sure I can post a summary and do some other things as well today. Everyone's just keep bumping up. That's as far as we'll go. It is higher than what KDM guessed last time, but it's definitely under 1%. All right, bye-bye. Take care. Thanks, Davis. We'll end on that note before I completely lose my voice. Oh, what's going on here? Thanks for joining me, Hunters. Thanks for... Hey, where's the feedback Friday? There it is. Thanks for joining me, Hunters. Thanks for all the Queso Geyser questions, feedbacks, comments. I wrote down some notes here as well. I will try to get a summary posted with some of the Geyser feedback as well. Have yourself a great weekend. If you're watching this recorded, have yourself a great whenever time that comes after this. Happy hunting, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.